I watched the SUV I'd been riding in for 6 years roll toward the security booth without me. The guard scanned his tablet. He didn't even look at Michael. He looked past the car, past Miriam's furious hand still pointed at the wet gravel where my bag had landed, and he looked at me. The gate didn't open for them. It opened for me. The screen behind him flashed one line, Danielle Whitfield, sole surviving heir. Every guard on that driveway went still at the same time, like someone had hit pause on the whole estate. My husband had just thrown the owner of this property out of his own car. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe before you go any further, because what's waiting on the other side of that gate is going to change how you see everything that happened in the 20 minutes before it. I've spent 11 years showing up for kids nobody else showed up for. Group homes with peeling paint. Courtrooms where a 14-year-old had to explain again why he ran. Living rooms where a foster placement was falling apart and someone needed to sit on the floor with a scared 8-year-old until a caseworker could get there. My coworkers called it a calling. Michael, in the last 2 years of our marriage, called it a nice thing I did that didn't pay anything. He wasn't always like that. I need to say that clearly, because it's tempting to look back at a marriage that ended in the mud outside a mansion and decide the whole thing was rotten from day one. It wasn't. 9 years ago, the week I aged out of my last foster placement with nowhere lined up to go, Michael was the one who found me a couch to sleep on and didn't make it weird. He was 23, broke, driving a car with a check engine light that never turned off, and he still showed up at the shelter parking lot at 11 at night because I'd called and he didn't like how I sounded. He didn't fix anything. He just stayed until I stopped shaking. I told him later that was the moment I decided I wanted to build a life with him, not because he had money or answers, because when I had nothing and no one, he came anyway. The man I married rented a 1-bedroom above a hardware store and thought a perfect Sunday was grilling in the parking lot with the guys from his sales job. I wasn't ashamed of any of it. I'd grown up with nothing. A small, imperfect, warm life felt like winning. But somewhere around year 4, I noticed Michael had started answering, "What does your wife do?" with a tight smile and a fast subject change. He wasn't lying about me. He just stopped saying it out loud. The shift didn't happen all at once. It happened the way rot happens in a house, quietly, from the inside, until the day you lean on a railing that isn't there anymore. His new boss had a lake house. His new friends had blazers with buttons that meant something. And somewhere in there, the woman who grew up in the system stopped being the story he was proud of and became the story he'd learned to leave out. The nonprofit office smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet, and I loved it more than any place I'd ever worked. 3 rooms above a laundromat on Hull Street, a space heater that only worked if you kicked it twice, and a corkboard covered in photos of kids who'd aged out, graduated, or just needed someone to remember their birthday. I'd built Bright Path from nothing but a grant and a folding table 6 years earlier. By the time Michael and I got married, it had grown into something that fed 40 kids a week and found beds for a dozen more. That Tuesday, I was on the floor with Desi, a 9-year-old who'd bounced through 3 placements in 1 year, helping him sound out words in a library book about sharks. His foster mother waited by the door, checking her phone, tired in the specific way that comes from loving someone else's child on no sleep and less money. "You're good with him," she said, when Desi ran off to find another book. "He's good with me," I said. "Kids like that just need someone to stay still long enough." I didn't tell her I understood exactly what he needed, because I'd needed it too once, and nobody had stayed still for me until a caseworker named Rhonda decided I was worth the paperwork. Michael texted me twice that afternoon, both times about dinner with his new regional director, a man named Grantham who'd mentioned, more than once, that his wife sat on the board of the Children's Hospital Gala. Wear the navy dress, not the one with the ink stain. There was no ink stain. There was a small coffee mark near the hem, from a morning I'd spent refilling thermoses at Bright Path before a shift, and Michael knew that, and called it ink anyway, like the truth embarrassed him more than the stain did. I wore it, I always wore what he asked back then because peace felt cheaper than the fight. At the dinner, Grantham's wife asked what I did, and Michael answered before I could. "She's in nonprofit work," he said, in the tone people use for a hobby. Then he pivoted, smooth as water, into a story about his quarter numbers. Later in the car, I asked him why he always did that. "Did what?" Answered for me, like I'm not in the room. He gripped the wheel a little tighter. Streetlights slid gold across his jaw, and for a second he looked like a stranger deciding how much honesty to spend on me. "I just don't want people asking a lot of questions," he said. "About where you came from, it's not their business." It wasn't concern in his voice. It was something closer to shame, and it landed in my chest like a door quietly closing on a room I hadn't known I was still standing in. The envelope arrived on a Thursday, tucked between a water bill and a flyer for the school supply drive, and it didn't belong with either one. Heavy black stock, no return address, my name embossed in silver instead of printed. I turned it over twice before opening it, the way you'd handle something that might be a mistake meant for somebody else. Inside was a single card. "You are invited to attend the reading of the estate of Cornelius Ashe. Thursday, 6 p.m. Ashe House. This invitation is non-transferable." I didn't know the name. I said it out loud in the kitchen, testing the shape of it, and it meant nothing to me at all. No memory, no face, no reason a dead stranger's lawyers would want me in a room for the reading of his will. I almost tossed it, almost laughed it off as some clerical mix-up, some other Danielle in some other zip code. But something about the paper stopped me, the weight of it, the way it had been hand-delivered instead of mailed, no postmark anywhere on the envelope. I left it on the counter and went to check on dinner. Michael found it before I got back. "Ash," he said when I walked in, already turning the card over in his fingers like it was something he could spend. His whole posture had changed, shoulders back, eyes bright in a way I hadn't seen since his last promotion. "Danielle. Do you have any idea who that is?" "No." "He's not just money, he's the money. Half the city's board seats trace back to some deal he made 40 years ago. He set the card down like it was fragile, like it mattered more than anything on that counter had ever mattered. "Why would they invite you?" "I don't know, Michael. That's what I said." He wasn't listening anymore. He was already somewhere else, running numbers, building a room in his head full of people he wanted to shake hands with. "We're going," he said. "It says non-transferable. It says you're invited. It doesn't say alone." He smiled, and it didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. "Think about it. Every person who matters in this city is going to be in that house. This is the kind of room you don't get invited into twice. This isn't a networking event, Michael. Somebody died. Everything's a networking event if you're smart about it." I stared at him, at the card in his hand that he was already treating like an asset, and felt something in me go very quiet and very still, the way a house goes quiet right before a storm finally breaks over it. "Wear the green," he said, heading for the closet. "Not the yellow. The yellow's too plain for a room like that." I didn't answer. I picked the card back up off the counter, turned it over once more in the lamplight, and wondered what kind of man leaves an invitation behind that isn't meant to be shared, and why, out of everyone, it had found me. I wore the yellow dress anyway. Michael noticed the second I came down the stairs, jaw tightening before he'd said a single word, and I braced myself for the argument I already knew was coming. "I told you the green." "You did. So why?" "Because it's mine, Michael. Because I like it, and because for one night I wanted to feel like myself instead of something you'd picked out for a room full of strangers." He didn't answer. He just turned and walked to the car, and that silence said more than anything he could have shouted. The ride out to Ashe House took almost 2 hours, and somewhere around the first hour, Miriam decided silence wasn't good enough for her either. "I still don't understand why you got the invitation," she said, from the front seat, not bothering to turn around. "A woman who runs a food pantry, invited to a room full of the Ashe estate's lawyers." "It's not a food pantry, Miriam." "It's close enough." Paul, folded into the seat beside me with his phone glowing against his face, laughed under his breath like she'd made a joke instead of a wound. "Just don't say much tonight," he said, not even looking up. "Michael's spent 2 years building relationships in that room. Don't be the reason he loses one." "I'm not planning to say anything at all," I said. "I was invited. I didn't ask to be a topic." Rain started somewhere past the second hour, first a mist against the windshield, then a hard, drumming downpour that turned the headlights into smeared gold streaks on the glass. Michael's hands tightened on the wheel with every mile, and the closer we got, the tighter his voice pulled. "When we get there," he said, "let me do the talking. If anyone asks how you know the family, say we're old friends of the estate. Don't mention the nonprofit." "Why would I lie about my own work?" "Because your own work makes us look like we don't belong here." That was the moment something in me finally stopped bending. "We don't belong here, Michael. I don't even know why I was invited, but I'm not going to spend the whole night apologizing for who I am so you can impress people who haven't asked me a single question yet." "You always do this," he snapped, twisting toward me now, rain hammering the roof like static. "You always make it about you being some noble little orphan. Nobody in that house is going to care about your sob story." "Michael, get out." The car had barely slowed at the gates when he said it, and Miriam was already reaching back to shove my bag toward the door, her face lit gold and furious in the passing lamplight. "Get out," he said again louder, "before you embarrass us both." I stepped into the rain in my yellow dress, gravel biting through my heels, and watched the door slam shut behind me like a verdict. The guard who'd waved the SUV away offered me his umbrella, but the damage was already done, my dress clinging cold against my legs, mascara surely bleeding down my face, gravel still stinging the soles of my feet through ruined heels. He didn't ask about the car. He didn't ask why I was standing alone at the gates of a stranger's estate in a downpour. He just said, "This way, Ms. Ash," and something in me stumbled over the name harder than my feet had stumbled over the gravel. "That's not my name," I said. "It will be in a moment," he answered, gently, like he'd said those words to someone else once before. Inside, the mansion swallowed the storm whole. Marble floors gleamed under warm light, and the sudden quiet after the pounding rain felt like stepping into a different world entirely. Wood polish and old paper in the air, a fire somewhere crackling low. A woman in a charcoal suit rose from a leather chair the moment I entered, silver hair pinned back, eyes sharp enough to measure me in a single glance. "Danielle," she said, "my name is Ferris. I was your father's attorney for 31 years. "My father is dead. He died when I was a baby." "That's what you were told." Ferris gestured to the chair across from her, waiting until I sat, my dress dripping quietly onto silk upholstery I was certain cost more than my apartment. "Cornelius Ash was your biological father. He placed you in the foster system yourself, Danielle, not because he didn't want you, because he was being hunted." "Hunted?" "There were people who would have used a daughter against him, kidnapped you, ransomed you, worse. He had enemies who'd already tried once before you were even born. He believed the only way to keep you alive was to make sure no one, not even you, knew you existed." The fire popped. Somewhere down a long hallway, a clock ticked, steady as a pulse. "He watched you," Ferris said, quieter now. "Every year. Reports on your grades, your first job, the nonprofit you built with your own hands. He was prouder of that pantry, Danielle, than of half the businesses that bear his name." My hands had started shaking, and it wasn't from the cold anymore. "Why now? Why tell me at all?" "Because he died 3 weeks ago, and his will is very specific." Ferris slid a folder across the table, the ash seal pressed into black wax on its cover. "You are his sole legal heir. Everything, the estate, the holdings, the foundations, passes to you tonight, the moment you sign." I stared at my own name typed at the top of the first page, Danielle Ash, and thought of Michael's taillights vanishing down that dark, rain-slicked road. "He's still out there," I said. "My husband, he doesn't know." Ferris's expression didn't soften. "He will," she said. "And very soon, Dan Paul, that's going to matter a great deal more to him than it ever mattered tonight." The gates had barely swallowed Dinpal's yellow dress into the rain before Michael understood, with a cold and total certainty, exactly what he had just done. "Turn around," he said. The driver hesitated. "Sir, the gate's already sealed behind." "I said turn around." Miriam twisted in her seat, mascara streaked from the storm hammering the windows, her voice climbing toward panic. "What does sole surviving heir mean? Michael, what does that mean?" "It means," Paul said slowly, still staring at the screen the guard had flashed before the gate swallowed it, "that Dinpal just became the single richest person any of us have ever met, and we left her standing in the mud to get there." Nobody spoke for a long moment. Rain drummed the roof, relentless, and somewhere out past the wrought iron, Dinpal was walking into a house none of them could enter. "This is fixable," Michael said, though his voice didn't sound like he believed it. "Is it?" Miriam's laugh had no humor in it at all. "You told her to get out, in front of security cameras, Michael, in front of God knows how many witnesses." "She'll forgive me. She always forgives me." Paul turned to look at him, something calculating sliding into place behind his eyes. "That's actually useful," he said. "If she forgives easily, this doesn't have to be a disaster. It has to be managed." "Managed how?" "You're still her husband. Whatever she inherits tonight legally, that's still community property in most interpretations, depending how the will is structured. But only if the marriage stays intact, or if it ends in a way that benefits you." Paul's voice had gone smooth, the same voice he used closing deals nobody should have said yes to. "Apologize. Grovel if you have to. Get back inside that circle of trust before her lawyers build a wall around her. And if she doesn't take me back, then we find another way in." Paul was already pulling out his phone, thumbs moving fast. "Every fortune this size has cracks somewhere, trustees who resent a surprise heir, board members worried about stability, family members who think they deserve a say. We just have to find the crack before someone else seals it." Miriam had gone quiet, watching the two of them the way she used to watch stock tickers, waiting for the number to move in her favor. "You're talking about taking it from her." "I'm talking about not being stupid enough to let it slip away twice," Paul said. "She's naive, Miriam. Kind. The kind of woman who thinks decency gets returned in kind. That's not a flaw we caused. It's a door somebody left open." Michael stared out at the gates, gold light bleeding faint through the storm from the mansion beyond them, and felt something ugly and hungry replace whatever shame had flickered in him minutes earlier. "Then let's go find the crack," he said. Michael called 11 times before I finally answered, and when I did, his voice had changed completely, soft now, careful, dressed up in an apology he clearly hadn't practiced enough. "Dinpal, thank God, I've been so worried about you. You left me at the gate, Michael." I know, and I've thought about nothing else since. It was the rain, the stress of the drive, Miriam getting in my head that wasn't me. You know that isn't who I am." "It's exactly who you are. You just don't usually get caught this fast." A pause, long enough that I could hear Paul's voice, murmuring something in the background before Michael muted it. "Can we talk, in person? I miss my wife." "You miss what I turned into an hour after you left me in the rain." The line went quiet, and then his tone shifted again, sliding from wounded to wounded and sharp all at once. "You've changed already. 2 days in that house, and you sound like a different person." Maybe I finally sound like myself. I hung up before he could answer, and for a moment, I let myself believe that would be the end of it. It wasn't. By Thursday, Faras called with a different kind of update, her voice flat in the way people get when they're bracing you for something. "2 of your preliminary accounts have been frozen," she said. "A joint filing, citing concerns about your mental fitness to manage new assets. Your husband's name is on the request." "He can't do that." "He's attempting it anyway, alongside a colleague named Paul Runke. They've retained counsel. Fast counsel." Faras exhaled. "There's more, Dinpal. A story ran this morning in a local business outlet, anonymous sourcing. It paints you as unstable, grief-stricken, opportunistic, possibly coached by outside parties to claim an inheritance that isn't legitimately yours." I read the article twice, my hands cold around my phone. Phrases like sudden and questionable claim and estranged husband concerned for her Wulbupung sat under my name like stains that wouldn't lift no matter how many times I scrubbed at them. "They're rewriting me," I said quietly. "They're trying to," Faras corrected. "There's a difference. Your father built protections into this estate long before you knew you needed them. But Dinpul, you need to stop answering Michael's calls. Every conversation is being recorded. Every soft word is evidence they're building for a courtroom, not for reconciliation." I thought of 11 missed calls, of "I miss my wife," of how carefully rehearsed that gentleness had sounded once I knew what it was for. "He's not trying to come back to me," I said. "No," Farah said. "He's trying to prove you were never fit to leave." I set the phone down on the desk in my father's study, surrounded by journals I hadn't opened yet, and understood, for the first time since the gates swung shut behind me, that survival here would cost more than grief. It would cost every soft instinct I had left. 3 nights after the reading, unable to sleep, I found myself walking the mansion's east wing with nothing but a hallway lamp and a restlessness I couldn't name. That was how I found the door behind the bookshelf in my father's study. Not hidden exactly, just unassuming, the kind of thing you'd only notice if you already suspected something wasn't finished being said. Faras hadn't mentioned it. Maybe she didn't know it existed. Behind it was a narrow room lined floor to ceiling with journals, hundreds of them, spanning decades, along with a single steel filing cabinet that looked out of place among all that leather and paper. I sat on the floor and started reading. My father's handwriting was small, careful, the writing of a man used to documenting things nobody else was supposed to see. Early entries were about me, my first foster placement, my second, the year I aged out with nowhere to go. Later entries widened. Board members he no longer trusted, executives he'd hired and slowly come to regret hearing. One name appeared more than any other. Paul Renner continues to request access to preliminary trust accounts under the guise of estate modernization. I have declined twice. His requests grow more specific each time, always timed to moments of instability within the family, a marriage, a death, a transition of power. I suspect he is waiting for exactly the kind of vulnerability that would let him move money before anyone thinks to check. My hands had gone still on the page. Further in, a folder marked contingency held something closer to a warning than a journal entry. Copies of wire authorizations Paul had attempted years earlier under a different executive's watch, flagged, blocked, quietly buried before they could do damage. My father had known exactly what kind of man Paul was long before I ever stood shivering at these gates. The last entry in that folder chilled me most. "If anything happens to me before Danielle is told the truth, watch Renner closely in the weeks after. Men like him don't create opportunity. They wait for someone else's chaos and call it their own idea." I sat there a long time, the journal open in my lap, understanding for the first time that my father hadn't just left me a fortune. He'd left me a map, every crack Paul might try to slip through, already marked, already anticipated, years before Michael ever learned my maiden name meant anything at all. I gathered the folder, the ledgers, every page with Paul's name on it, and carried them back to my father's desk. Whatever Michael and Paul were building outside those gates, I was no longer walking into this blind. The ballroom at Ash House had been rebuilt for exactly one purpose that night: to announce me to the world my father had spent his whole life protecting me from, and I walked into it wearing the same yellow dress I'd been thrown out of a car in 3 weeks earlier. Ferris had asked if I was certain about that. I told her I'd never been more certain of anything. Cameras lined the back wall, reporters packed shoulder to shoulder near the stage, and beneath the chandeliers I could feel Michael's eyes find me before I'd even crossed the room. He looked good. He always looked good in a room full of people worth impressing. Beside him, Paul adjusted his cufflinks like a man rehearsing lines in his head, and Miriam stood a step behind them both, her smile already aimed at the cameras. Ferris took the podium first, thanking the guests, the foundations, the city officials who'd shown up for optics as much as tribute. Then she gestured toward me. Please welcome Cornelius Ash's daughter and sole heir, Danielle Ash." The applause hadn't even settled before Michael stepped forward, flanked by a lawyer I recognized from the frozen asset filing. "I hate to interrupt this evening," he said, voice pitched for the microphones, "but there's something the public deserves to know before any transfer of this estate moves forward." He turned to the room, performing concern like it was a Tony-worthy role. "My wife has been under significant psychological strain since her father's death. We've filed for emergency conservatorship, out of love, out of concern for her well-being." A ripple moved through the crowd. Cameras swung toward me. I let the silence stretch, exactly as long as it needed to. "Since we're being honest in front of cameras tonight," I said, stepping to the podium myself, "let's be fully honest." I nodded to Ferris, who tapped a remote, and the screen behind us lit up with an audio waveform. "This is a recording from 3 weeks ago, the night my husband called claiming to miss me." Michael's voice filled the ballroom, tinny and unmistakable. "Every soft word is what we need on record before the filing goes in. Keep her talking, Paul. The longer she sounds emotional, the easier this gets." The room went silent in a way applause never could have matched. "That's not concern," I said. "That's a script." I turned to the second screen, where Ferris pulled up wire transfers, dates, and account numbers. "These are transfers Paul Renner authorized from a shell account tied to preliminary estate funds 3 days after my husband learned who my father was. Embezzlement, Ferris tells me, is the technical term." Paul's face had gone the color of the marble floor. "Michael didn't leave me at those gates by accident," I said, looking directly at him now. "He left me there because he thought I was worthless. He only came back once he learned I wasn't." I let that land across every camera in the room. "I'm not the woman you can gaslight into a conservatorship," I said. "I'm my father's daughter, and tonight I'm done being quiet." By morning, the story had already outrun every version Michael tried to spin. Federal investigators arrived at Paul's office before the sun was fully up, escorting him out past reporters who'd camped there since the gala footage went public overnight. Miriam's name surfaced twice in the embezzlement filings, tied to a shell account she'd sworn under oath she knew nothing about. Michael's lawyer withdrew from the conservatorship case by noon, releasing a statement that used the word misunderstanding, the way people use bandages on wounds too deep to actually close. I didn't watch it unfold from a courtroom bench. Ferris handled that, brisk and merciless in a way that made me grateful, every day, that my father had chosen her decades before he ever chose to protect me. I watched it from the study instead, sitting in the chair where I'd first learned my own name wasn't the one I'd grown up with. My father's journals were spread across the desk, decades of quiet entries about a daughter he'd never held, never called, never let himself claim, entries about my science fair, my college acceptance, the ribbon cutting for Bright Path's first real building. He'd been there the whole time, in ink instead of person, loving me from a distance he'd built to keep me breathing. I finished reading the last one just before sunset. Then I walked out onto the balcony overlooking the grounds, the same iron gates below me that had once swung open for me and shut for everyone I'd arrived with. Rain had given way to a clean, cold evening, stars just starting to needle through the dark. The estate stretched out in every direction, gardens, guest houses, a legacy heavy enough to crush someone who hadn't already survived worse. I wasn't crushed. I thought of Desi, back at Bright Path, and the dozens of kids like him still waiting on a system that moved too slowly and cared too little. I thought of every year I'd spent believing I had no family, no roots, no one keeping watch, and how wrong I'd been the entire time. My phone buzzed once. Ferris, confirming the Foundation's new charter. Half my father's philanthropic wing folded directly into Bright Path, expanded, funded, permanent. I didn't answer right away. I stood there a while longer, feeling the cold settle around my shoulders instead of through them. Feeling, for the first time in longer than I could measure, steady. Michael had once told me I embarrassed him, told me my roots made us look like we didn't belong in rooms like this one. He'd been wrong about almost everything, but he'd been right about one thing without meaning to be. I didn't belong in the version of that life he'd built for me. I belonged in this one, the one I was building myself. Gates open behind me. Storm finally passed. Looking back, I understand now that the people who diminish you rarely do it because you're small. They do it because your light makes their own dimming obvious. Michael never saw a woman beneath him. He saw a mirror he couldn't stand to look into, so he tried to shatter it instead. If you've ever been made to feel like a burden for simply being yourself, let this be your reminder. Your worth was never up for a vote. It was decided long before anyone else got a say. If this story moved you, hit subscribe, drop a comment below, and share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight.